do we actually design some projects for recovery?
Seeing firsthand the most iconic shipwreck in history, the Titanic.
An old rust-covered camera was recently discovered deep in the icy depths near the Titanic wreckage, and what it contained shocked the world. The photos from its fragile film offer a disturbing perspective on the fateful night the ship went down. These haunting images reveal moments never seen before, moments of fear, tragedy, and mystery that change everything we thought we knew. What horrifying secrets did this camera capture? Join us as we uncover the disturbing Titanic photos from the camera found in the deep ocean. Where the Titanic came from. Before we dive into the sad story, let's take a quick look at the Titanic's origin. The name Titanic was inspired by the Titans in Greek myths. It was built in Belfast, Ireland, back when the area was part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The Titanic was the second in a group of 3 massive ships called the Olympic-class ocean liners. The first ship in this series was the Olympic, and the last one was the Britannic. These ships were the biggest ones owned by the British company White Star Line, which had a total of 29 steam-powered ships in the year 1912. The idea for these 3 ships came up in the middle of 1907 during a chat between J. Bruce Ismay, who was the boss of White Star Line, and J.P. Morgan, an American businessman who owned the company controlling White Star Line. The construction of these ships was handled by Harland and Wolff, a shipbuilding company in Belfast that had been working with White Star Line since 1867. Harland and Wolff were given a lot of freedom in designing the ships. Usually, one of the designers, Wilhelm Wolff, would come up with a rough idea, and Edward James Harland would turn that into a proper ship plan. Money wasn't a big concern for these ships. Harland and Wolff were allowed to spend whatever they needed, along with an extra 5% as their profit. For the first 2 Olympic-class ships, the agreed cost was £3 million, which would be worth about £370 million in 2023, plus additional expenses and the usual profit percentage. Harland and Wolff brought in their top experts to design the Olympic-class ships. The team was led by Lord Pirrie, who worked for both Harland and Wolff and the White Star Line. Thomas Andrews, who managed the design department at Harland and Wolff, also played a big role. He had help from his deputy, Edward Wilding, who handled things like the ship's stability and balance. Another key figure was Alexander Carlisle, the shipyard's head drafter and general manager. Carlisle took care of the decorations, equipment, and overall layout, including figuring out how to set up lifeboats in the best way. On the July 29, 1908, Harland and Wolff showed their ship designs to J. Bruce Ismay and other leaders at White Star Line. Ismay liked what he saw and gave the green light 2 days later by signing 3 agreements to start building the ships. At first, the first ship, which later became the Olympic, didn't even have a name. It was just called Number 400, because it was the 400th ship Harland and Wolff had built. The Titanic was based on an updated version of this design and was labeled Number 401. The Titanic, often called the unsinkable ship, was finished on March 31, 1911. But it wouldn't be long before it faced a huge test that would question whether it truly deserved that title. What happens next will show us the truth. Disaster strikes. When the RMS Titanic started its first journey in the year 1912, people thought it was unsinkable. This trip, which was supposed to go across the Atlantic Ocean from England to America, caught everyone's attention, not just because the ship was huge, but also because it was incredibly fancy. The Titanic was about 882 feet long and 92 feet wide. When fully loaded, it weighed over 52,000 tons. That size allowed for lots of amazing features. The first-class area had veranda cafes, a gym, a swimming pool, and even luxurious Turkish baths. It seemed like everything about the Titanic was perfect, but this dream didn't last. Just 4 days after leaving port, the ship hit an iceberg and sank. In less than 3 hours, the unsinkable ship was gone. The Titanic was built to hold 64 lifeboats, but for some reason it only carried 20. 4 of those were collapsible, which didn't make things any easier when it came time to evacuate. To make matters worse, it took about an hour for the first lifeboat to be lowered into the water, and even then, most of the boats weren't filled to their full capacity. The Titanic sent out distress signals, hoping for help. While some ships responded, most of them were too far away to make it in time. The closest ship, the RMS Carpathia, was about 58 miles away and immediately began heading toward the Titanic after receiving the distress call. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes for the Titanic to completely sink after hitting the iceberg. Unfortunately, the RMS Carpathia didn't arrive until about an hour after the ship went under. Thankfully, its crew was able to save survivors and bring them aboard. Out of the estimated 2,224 passengers and crew on the Titanic, around 1,500 lost their lives. Only about 700 people survived, and most of them were women and children. The survivors finally reached New York on April 18th. Even though the Titanic sank, it wasn't forgotten. Soon after the tragedy, plans were made to recover what could be salvaged from the wreck, but even that came with its own set of challenges. Initial attempts to recover the Titanic's wreckage. Right after the Titanic sank on April 15, 1912, people started coming up with ideas to recover it from the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean. At the time, though, no one knew exactly where it was or what kind of shape it was in. Some wealthy families who had lost loved ones in the disaster, like the Guggenheims, Astors, and Wideners, teamed up and hired the Merritt and Chapman Derrick and Wrecking Company to try to bring the Titanic back up. But the project didn't get far. The divers couldn't even come close to reaching the incredible depth where the Titanic rested, where the water pressure is over 6,000 pounds per square inch. At one point, the company thought about using dynamite to break apart the wreck and bring bodies to the surface, but they eventually gave up. Ocean experts at the time believed the pressure at those depths would have crushed the bodies into jelly-like lumps. Interestingly, they were wrong about that. Scientists didn't discover until 1987 that corpses filled with water can remain mostly intact at the bottom. This discovery was made using the same submersible that explored the Titanic a year earlier. The cold water and high pressure where the Titanic sank would have stopped gases from forming in decomposing bodies, which kept them from floating back up to the surface. Over the years, people came up with all sorts of ideas to bring the Titanic back to the surface. Most of these plans didn't work out because of practical issues, not enough money, or a poor understanding of the conditions deep underwater. In March of 1914, Charles Smith, an architect from Denver, suggested using a submarine with electromagnets to locate the Titanic's steel hull. Once they found it, more magnets would be sent down from barges to pull the ship to the surface. The plan was estimated to cost $1.5 million, which would be about $35.5 million today. It was too expensive and unrealistic, so it never happened. Another idea involved using balloons to lift the ship. The plan was to attach the balloons to the Titanic's hull with magnets, and once enough were in place, the ship would float up. But like the first idea, this one stayed on paper. In the mid-1960s, an English hosiery worker named Douglas Woolley also tried to use nylon balloons to raise the ship, but technical issues stopped his plan. By the 1970s, people had come up with other wild ideas, like filling the wreck with wax, ping-pong balls, or glass spheres. But these were either too expensive or just didn't make sense. Someone even thought of freezing the Titanic in an ice jacket using liquid nitrogen, but that idea didn't go anywhere either. Many people and groups tried to find or salvage the Titanic. In 1977, Robert Ballard attempted to locate it with a salvage vessel, but failed. Walt Disney and National Geographic thought about funding an expedition, but backed out because of the high costs. British tycoon Sir James Goldsmith wanted to find the Titanic to promote his magazine, but had to stop because of money troubles. Fred Kohler, an electronics repairman from Florida, tried to build a submersible to search for treasure, but couldn't get the funding. Other plans, like using giant tankers with cranes, were also talked about, but never happened. In July 1980, a Texan oilman named Jack Grimm led an expedition to search for the Titanic. He got the money for this trip through sponsorship deals, media rights, and a donation from Columbia University for sonar equipment. Even though he brought along top scientists, the team ran into problems. Bad weather and broken equipment ruined their efforts, and they couldn't find anything definite. A documentary called Search for the Titanic came out in 1981, narrated by Orson Welles, to tell the story of this attempt. Grimm didn't give up and tried again in June 1981 with better sonar technology. The team rechecked some areas they thought might hold clues, but it turned out the targets were just natural features. At one point, they spotted something that looked like a propeller, but they couldn't confirm it was from the Titanic. Another documentary, Return to the Titanic, also released in 1981, shared this expedition's story. Grimm made a third attempt in July 1983, but it also didn't work out. Poor weather and limited technology stopped the team from finding the ship. What's surprising is that their equipment actually passed right over or near the wreck without detecting it. Even though these expeditions failed, the determination to find the Titanic eventually paid off. When it seemed like all hope was gone, solutions finally appeared, helping to solve the mystery of the ship's resting place. Discovery of the sunken, unsinkable ship. Although D. Michael Harris and Jack Grimm didn't manage to find the Titanic, their efforts helped map out the area where the ship had gone down. One big problem was that the Titanic's distress signals had given the wrong location, which made the already huge search area even larger. Despite not finding the ship during his 1977 expedition, Robert Ballard didn't lose hope. He came up with new tools and a fresh plan to take on the challenge. One of the tools was a system called Argo and Jason. Argo was a remote-controlled deep-sea vehicle with cameras and sonar that could be towed behind a ship, while Jason was a robot connected to Argo. Jason could move around on the ocean floor, take close-up pictures, and even collect samples. The images from the system were sent back to the ship, where they could be looked at right away. Although the system was made for science, it also had military uses. The United States Navy agreed to pay for it as long as Ballard's team did some secret missions for them. The Navy gave Ballard and his crew the job of running a month-long expedition every year for 4 years to make sure Argo and Jason stayed in good shape. They also allowed him to use part of that time to search for the Titanic after finishing the Navy's tasks. In 1984, Ballard's team used Argo to find the wrecks of 2 nuclear submarines, the USS Thresher and USS Scorpion, that had sunk in the North Atlantic at depths of almost 10,000 feet. During this mission, they discovered something important about how shipwrecks behave as they sink. Both submarines left a trail of debris spread out over a large area of the ocean floor. Lighter debris drifted farther from the wreck site because of ocean currents. By following this trail, the main wreckage could be located. This new approach became a key strategy in the search for the Titanic. In 1985, a second expedition was launched to map the wreck of the Scorpion submarine. After finishing that mission, only 12 days would be left to search for the Titanic. Since previous attempts, like the one by Harris and Grimm, had taken over 40 days without success, Robert Ballard knew he needed extra help. He reached out to a French oceanographic agency called IFREMER, which had worked with Woods Hole before. They had recently built a powerful side-scan sonar system called SAR. The French agreed to join the search and sent their research ship Le Suroît to help. The plan was simple. The French team would use their sonar to find possible spots where the Titanic might be, and then Ballard's team would use their Argo system to investigate those spots and confirm if it was the shipwreck. The French crew spent 5 weeks searching the ocean floor, starting on July 5th and finishing on August 12, 1985. They scanned an area of about 150 square nautical miles by moving their ship back and forth in straight lines, a method called mowing the lawn. Unfortunately, they didn't find anything at first, though later it was revealed they had come within a few hundred yards of the Titanic during their very first pass. Ballard realized that trying to find the Titanic itself with sonar was not the best plan, so he decided to use a different approach. He thought back to what they learned during the searches for Thresher and Scorpion. Instead of looking for the ship, he focused on finding the debris field. This was because the debris would cover a much bigger area, about 2 kilometers or more, while the Titanic itself was only about 27 meters wide. To do this, Ballard used Argo's cameras instead of sonar. Cameras could easily tell the difference between objects made by humans and natural things lying on the ocean floor, which sonar couldn't do. The plan was to tow Argo back and forth over the seabed all day and night, while people on the research ship Canoe watched the live camera feed for any signs of debris. After a week of finding nothing, things finally changed. Early in the morning on Sunday, the 1st of September, 1985, at exactly 12:48 a.m., bits and pieces of debris started showing up on the screens. One of those objects turned out to be a boiler, the same kind that was in photos of the Titanic taken back in 1911. The very next day, they found the main part of the wreck. Argo sent back the first pictures of the Titanic that anyone had seen in 73 years. The discovery made headlines everywhere, but now the big question was, what kinds of artifacts or items were still down there? Let's explore that next. The Titanic's oldest camera. Photographs and videos of the Titanic are extremely rare, but thanks to Bernie Palmer, we have a rare look at what the unsinkable ship looked like both before and after its tragic sinking. Bernie Palmer, a Canadian, was given a Kodak Brownie box camera as either a Christmas gift in 1911 or for her birthday on January 10, 1912. In early April, Bernie and her mother boarded the Cunard liner Carpathia in New York, headed for a Mediterranean cruise. Not long after leaving New York, the Carpathia received a distress call from the White Star liner Titanic on April 14th. The ship quickly turned around and raced toward the site of the disaster, rescuing over 700 survivors from the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. With her new camera in hand, Bernie started taking pictures right away. Due to a lack of food to feed both the paying passengers and the Titanic survivors, the Carpathia turned back to New York to land the survivors. The captain of the Carpathia decided to impose a news blackout, blocking all communications from the ship until all Titanic survivors had safely disembarked in New York. The demand for news stories was overwhelming, and reporters flooded the Carpathia, eager for first-hand accounts of the sinking and rescue. A reporter from Underwood & Underwood, a photography agency in New York, got one of the most valuable stories when he met Bernice Palmer aboard the Carpathia. She had not only taken pictures of the Titanic survivors on the ship's deck, but she had also captured photos of the iceberg that sank the Titanic. The reporter offered to develop, print, and return the photos to Bernie, along with $10. Not fully realizing how valuable her pictures were, Bernie happily agreed, and Underwood & Underwood ended up with priceless images of the Titanic wreck for almost nothing. This is the contract between Bernie and the reporter that transferred the rights to the photos. In 1986, Bernie donated her camera, Titanic photos, and related materials to the Smithsonian. Bernie Palmer's photos provide a rare personal view of the Titanic story, offering a touching glimpse into a world that was lost too soon. One of her most moving photos shows a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. George Ahada from Brooklyn, New York, happily enjoying their honeymoon aboard the ship. Their faces are full of the excitement and love that comes with starting a new chapter in life. It's hard to imagine the pain they would face later, but this picture captures a moment of pure joy, untainted by the tragedy that would follow. Another powerful image Bernie captured shows the Carpathia arriving at the Titanic disaster site. Under the pale moonlight, rescuers saw bits of wreckage floating in the water and lifeboats carrying survivors. The photo holds a quiet sadness, not just debris, but shattered dreams and lives lost overnight. Bernie's photograph brings you into that still, heartbreaking moment. One of the most haunting images she captured is of the infamous iceberg. Looking at it through her camera lens feels almost unreal. This massive, ordinary chunk of ice was the cause of the downfall of such a grand ship and the lives aboard it. Now let's shift our focus to some of the artifacts recovered from the wreckage site and explore what they can teach us. Artifacts from the wreckage. Since 1987, a private American company called RMS Titanic, Inc. has recovered more than 5,000 artifacts from the Titanic. These items range from pieces of the ship's hull to china. RMS Titanic, Inc. conducted 7 research and recovery missions to retrieve Titanic artifacts from the wreck site between 1987 and 2004. Since these missions, some Titanic items have sold for thousands of dollars at auctions. One of the first items to be found was an alligator bag that held a heartbreaking story belonging to Marion Meanwell, a passenger aboard the RMS Titanic who sadly did not survive the disaster. Inside the bag was a faded photograph believed to be of Marion's mother, one of the few such photos ever discovered. "It's a really beautiful, fashionable little bag," says Thomasina Ray, the Director of Collections for RMS Titanic Inc., the company that has recovered these artifacts. This US-based company has exclusive rights to salvage from the Titanic wreck and has collected many items, some of which are displayed in museums worldwide. The bag, made of alligator skin, managed to survive decades underwater in the cold depths of the North Atlantic. The fragile items inside, however, were preserved as well, offering a glimpse into Marion Meanwell's life. Marion was a 63-year-old milliner traveling to the US to be with her daughter, who had recently lost her husband. Inside the bag, there was paperwork that she would need for her new life in America, including a reference letter from her former landlord in London. It read, "We have always found Miss Meanwell to be a good tenant, prompt with payment." Also found was her medical inspection card, required for all third-class passengers to prove they weren't bringing any diseases into the US. However, this water-damaged document held a tragic twist. Marion had originally booked a passage on the Majestic, another White Star Line ship, but since it never sailed, the card shows that her booking was transferred to the Titanic, making her one of the more than 1,500 passengers who perished that night. Being able to tell her story and have these objects is really important, says Thomasina, otherwise she's just another name on the list. Among the items from Titanic survivors brought up from the ocean depths are perfumes. Thomasina opens a plastic container and a strong, sweet smell fills the air. "It's very potent," she says, admitting the scent is still powerful. Inside the container are tiny vials of perfume. Though sealed, the strong fragrance still escapes after so many years underwater. There was a perfume salesman on board, and he had over 90 of these little perfume vials. Thomasina explains, his name was Adolphe Saalfeld, and he had been traveling as a first-class passenger. Saalfeld was one of the 700 who survived. However, since women and children were prioritized during the evacuation, many men who made it off the ship were left with troubled feelings. "He had passed by the time we found this," Thomasina says. "But it's my understanding that he lived with some guilt. Survivor's guilt." Also in the collection is a champagne bottle, still containing champagne with a cork at the top. A little bit of water probably seeped in through the cork as it compressed and equalized the pressure. And then it just sat on the bottom of the ocean, Thomasina says. When the Titanic sank in 1912 after striking an iceberg, the ship broke apart, spilling its contents and creating a huge debris field. There are a lot of bottles on the ocean floor and a lot of stock pots and kitchen pots too, because the Titanic actually broke up near one of the kitchens, says Thomasina. There were thousands of bottles of champagne on board. The ship's owner wanted its first-class passengers to experience luxury at its best, with lavish surroundings and the finest food and drinks. It was like a floating palace, and the Titanic was supposed to be the most luxurious liner, Thomasina says. So having champagne, a gym, all these amazing amenities and great things for passengers would have been really important to them. Out of all the artifacts recovered from the wreckage, one thing became clear from the evidence. There were clear class distinctions aboard the Titanic. Let's dive deeper into that. For today's subscriber's pick, we're obviously looking into one of history's most infamous maritime disasters. Let's explore some lesser-known facts about the night the unsinkable ship met its tragic fate. Here's how an old camera captured revealed horrifying Titanic photos. It is true that the Titanic's crew received multiple iceberg warnings from other ships, but either dismissed or underestimated their seriousness. This oversight ultimately led to the fatal collision that sealed the ship's doom. And remember that emotional scene in James Cameron's 1997 movie where the band plays "Nearer My God to Thee" as the ship goes down? That wasn't just a Hollywood drama, it really happened. The Titanic's band, led by Wallace Hartley, courageously played on the deck until the very end, providing a haunting soundtrack to the ship's 3-hour descent into the icy Atlantic as people drowned. Tragically, the disaster claimed 1,503 lives, including the youngest victim, a 9-month-old baby. Here's a thought-provoking question for you. If you had been one of the over 2,200 passengers on board that fateful voyage, would you have made it out alive? What strategies would you have used to survive? Would you have tried to help others amidst the chaos or focused solely on saving yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Class distinctions aboard the Titanic. Life aboard the Titanic was very different depending on your social class. Even something as simple as the cups and plates passengers used showed this divide. A third-class mug was basic but strong, with a bright red White Star logo. A second-class plate was more refined, with delicate blue flowers on it. But the first-class dinner plates were something else entirely. Made from fine china, they had gold trim and an intricate garland pattern that shimmered in the light. The pattern would have been colored, but since it was on top of the glaze, it washed away over time, Thomasina explains. First-class passengers enjoyed their meals with silver service, while third-class passengers had to make do with sturdier, more durable china. Thomasina adds, third-class passengers would have handled the china themselves. It was designed to be much tougher and withstand rougher use than the others. RMS Titanic Inc. has exclusive permission to recover items from the wreck site, granted by a US court in 1994. However, they must follow strict rules. All items must stay together as a collection, never sold off individually, and must be carefully preserved. So far, the company has collected artifacts from the debris field around the wreck, but recently they've sparked some debate. They announced plans to retrieve the Marconi radio equipment, which was the device that sent out distress signals the night the Titanic sank. Some people believe the wreck should be left alone as it's a gravesite. "We want to respect Titanic," Thomasina says in response. "Our goal is to preserve the memory of the ship and share it with the public because not everyone can visit the Titanic, and we want to bring it to them. Soon the shelves of the company's secret warehouse might need more space." The latest expedition involved taking millions of photos to create a detailed 3D model of the wreck. As well as examining the Marconi radio room, the team has been identifying items in the debris field that they hope to retrieve in future dives. Another item recovered that proved the class system aboard the vessel was an entry ticket to the ship's luxurious Turkish baths, which sold for $11,000. While glass, metal, and ceramic pieces are common, paper items are much rarer. The paper or textile items survived because they were kept in suitcases. The tanned leather of the suitcases helped protect them, explained Alexandra Klingelhofer, the Vice President of Collections for Premier Exhibitions Inc. She described the suitcases as time capsules that offer a glimpse into the lives of their owners. "It's like reconnecting with someone by looking at the things they cared about," Klingelhofer said. Other famous Titanic artifacts include a kimono believed to have been worn by survivor Lady Duff Gordon on the night of the disaster, which sold for $75,000, and a violin owned by Wallace Hartley, the ship's bandmaster who continued to play as the ship sank, which sold for $1.7 million. Many artifacts have been retrieved from the wreck, but countless items still rest at the bottom of the sea, slowly decaying from corrosion, ocean currents, and the passage of time. When RMS Titanic Inc. announced its plans to conduct more explorations, including retrieving the ship's famous radio equipment, it faced strong criticism. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, argued in court that the radio could be surrounded by the remains of over 1,500 people, and therefore it should be left undisturbed. But in May 2020, U.S. District Judge Rebecca Beach Smith ruled that RMS Titanic Inc. had the right to recover the radio. She based her decision on the radio's historic and cultural value, along with the fact that it might soon be lost to time. Despite this, in June, the U.S. government filed a legal challenge, claiming the plan would violate federal law and an agreement with Britain that recognizes the Titanic wreck as a memorial site. While some argue that the ongoing decay of Titanic artifacts might justify further retrievals, there are still historians who oppose the removal of the radio. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.